All right. Well, thank you all for coming. A few more people may be joining us, but out of respect for your time and that of our panelists, we're going to get started. My name is Jeremy Campbell. I'm the associate director of or for strategic engagement with the Institute for a Sustainable Earth at George Mason University, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator today for this panel, who are all going to be focusing on collaborative adaptation to climate change in Virginia. And just as Demetra asked, sort of what sectors are represented here, it's really great that we have university researchers, we have members of the public sector working in municipalities and regional governments to really bring fresh perspectives to this to the specific case of Northern Virginia and adapting for climate. But of course, Northern Virginia is one of many. Talk about Baltimore. We can talk about the Pacific Northwest, all different places that are dealing with these questions of how to make cross-sectoral sorts of collaborations with an eye towards adaptation, towards climate, providing for equity, providing for economic growth, et cetera. So with that, just a real quick word about kind of how we're going to go about this. We're going to hear from each of our panelists in succession. They're going to present just a kind of bird's eye view, a 30,000-foot view of what their organizations are up to when it comes to climate adaptation in the local context here in Northern Virginia. Maybe 5-6 minutes. They've got some slides. We'll hear from them. And then I'll have a few questions to kind of get a discussion going. And we will certainly entertain questions from you in the audience. We have a microphone on this side, a microphone on that side, or you can just shout as well when the time comes. So thank you again for being here, and thank you, our panelists. Our first panelist, whose slides are right up there, is Bob Lazaro from the NVRC, the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. Thanks, Bob.
So, is there a mic button? Does anyone know?
You should be good.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Lazaro, and I'm Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Regional District Commission, which is the official planning district for Northern Virginia. We're one of 21 planning districts in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we are by far the largest in terms of population. Just a little bit more about us. We're a consortium of the 13 leading local governments in the region. Our service areas include environment, regional demographics, human services, community military partnerships, and energy. The population of the region is 2.5 million people, nearly 30% of the Commonwealth's population. But the most interesting statistic is while we're only 3% of the land mass, we generate 42% of the Commonwealth's GDP, which is $276 billion. And if we were a country, and some of our friends south of us think we are, we would be the 48th largest economy in the world. So there's a lot of economic heft here in Northern Virginia. Our number one job is collaboration. We work with George Mason University, we work with Arlington County and all of our local government partners in a number of different areas, resilience and adaptation. Clean Water Partners, our coastal program addresses stormwater-related matters. Energy, we operate the region's Solarized Nova program. We created the first regional solar map in Virginia. We helped inform community energy planning, and we work with our local partners and others to promote energy efficiency and weatherization in the region. We are the recipient of 2 grants from the federal government on military installation resilience review. As you can imagine, we have Quantico, Fort Belvoir, Joint Base Myer-Henderson Hall, the Pentagon, and a host of other military facilities in the region. They're big employers. They have a big impact on the region, and we are working with them. And we've identified programs and projects that help both sides of the fence line, and we're working on 2 projects right now. We also have international partnerships. This year, we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary with the Vauban region, Stuttgart. And I know Demetra would tell you, Arlington County's energy plan was born in Stuttgart region more than 20 years ago on a study tour that we took to that area, and from there the community energy plan has grown. And we also work with higher education. We're proud to work with the largest public university in Virginia, George Mason University. We're working with Jim and his team and Leah at the Virginia Climate Center. with one of the premier research universities in the United States, if not the world, and we're really proud of that. And we actually have 2 students who will be working with us on 2 projects important to our regional commission as a whole. One example of success is our Solarize Nova program. It was launched in 2014. It has led to 8.5 megawatts of new solar, nearly $25 million in private sector investment. The arrays offset more than 9,100 tons of carbon pollution a year. And I'm really proud that nearly 9% of all new arrays in Northern Virginia, and they have taken off since 2014, are a result of this program, and in part informed by what we saw in Stuttgart region many years ago. So that's just a little flavor of what we do working with our local governments, GMU, and you'll hear a little bit more specifics from Arlington County. And with that, I'll turn it over to Demetra. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome.
Very nice. And yeah, next we will hear from Demetra McBride from the County of Arlington.
Let's see.
So am I going just here, to the right,
Probably do this.
or that? Oh,
Yeah, these
perfect.
things will work.
Okay, great. Hi, as Jeremy said, this is going to be very quick. It is the 30,000-foot Airbus view of what Arlington is doing. Really quickly, because this is about adaptation and because I'm a Virgo and we're persnickety, we want to talk about understanding the different types of climate action. So there's mitigation. Think of this as a huge wave. And mitigation is taking action and making behavioral and corporate and infrastructure changes so that you're stopping the wave from getting any bigger. Adaptation, which is actually where my heart rests, is preemptive action to harden you against the impacts that you will not be able to avoid. Oxygen has an atmospheric life of around 100 to 125 years. We're still dealing with the accumulation of carbon and other emissions that were created during the Industrial Revolution. So there are going to be things that are going to happen that despite our best efforts, we need to be aware of. And then resilience is really how you bounce back after the event. And there's a lot of interchangeability. People use the last 2 terms, adaptation and resilience, interchangeably. But just think of it in terms of energy. Adaptation is making it so you don't lose your total electricity or you have backup systems. And resilience is how quickly do you restore the system after the event. I hope that the corporate part of the audience will be encouraged by this. But I've been in Arlington for 6 years. Before that, I was in California for 8 years, and before that in Florida for 5. So I've hit at least 2 out of the 3 worst states for climate in the United States in terms of impacts. And what I learned by default and by error was that if you want to be really successful in making a community and being part of a state, a national, and an international movement that really addresses successfully issues of climate, you cannot think about it as a wonk, because you have too many, as this audience illustrates, you have too many sectors to just say, oh, I'm going to talk to people about climate change and it's an existential threat of our time. If you don't do this, you're a bad person. You really have to speak to the interests that everybody has. And when you start having that dialogue with all of these interests, you'll see that your commonality, this new lexicon develops where you're acknowledging everybody's shared directives and everybody's shared priorities. So be a climate CEO, not a wonk. And as I said down here, know as much as Al Gore, if not more, but think like Jamie Dimon. So be entrepreneurial in terms of climate change. Right now, quite frankly, earlier, if you were at the luncheon plenary session, Standard & Poor's, I'm just going to pick up just little independent thoughts. Standard & Poor's and Moody's are already grading or starting to acknowledge and incorporate issues of climate adaptation and climate resiliency into how they grade and rate local governments and their bond ratings. So and they're not happy with just plans. They want to see your implementation program. They want to see your capital 10-year programs. They want to know that you're actually investing in these systems. And if not, it is going to negatively impact. That makes the cost of borrowing for governments go up. It means they can do less with their capital programs, and it means they have to start constricting on services, operations, and the level of service that they give their constituents. So you have to see where there's this cascading. I hate to put it all down to money, but money is the engine that makes your community desirable, makes it economically competitive, makes businesses who are here want to stay here, makes new businesses that are looking for a new home want to come here. So that competitive, resilient, desirable, and vital, and kind of forward thinking. I don't say, well, this is a climate thing. I call it a future-facing strategy and approach. So look at all of these, concepts of how mercantilism and entrepreneurialism is inextricably intertwined with successful climate action. Enhance all your assets, your natural systems. They have ecosystem services, performance buildings, community health. Reduce the risk to your disadvantaged communities. Ignoring your disadvantaged communities, not accounting for that gap in their ability. They're living in buildings that have less energy performance. Their indoor air quality is poorer. They are more exposed to urban heat island effects because they have more of their population that works out of doors. If you do not address that, you will find yourself encountering higher costs in terms of living space, accommodation, certainly public health costs, and you're balkanizing your community. That's not a formula for success. And market and use your future immunity. I work very closely with our economic development department, and they utilize the things that Arlington does in order to attract and speak to businesses. Speak to everything, the things that everyone wants, the common things that we all want, regardless of what sector you operate in, are strong property values, economic choice and stimulus, magnetism, competitiveness, effective funded government, quality infrastructure and assets, and of course the physical beauty and the desirability of your community. And know the cost of inaction. I'll get to that in a moment. These are just very quick examples of some of the things that Arlington is doing. We have an energy assurance plan, and again, each of these plans is not a plan in and of itself. It is married with an action and implementation program. So we've got it upscaled for microgrids all the way down to resiliency measures for special needs populations. Our risk assessment and management plan, those of you who live here know that for several years, starting around 2016 through 2019, there was a series of repetitive intense storms here. There was significant flooding, significant loss in terms of property. And we could have there was one historic storm that if it had happened in the middle of the night, we probably would have run the risk of a possible loss of life. So what we sat down and said is we have to really look at risk assessments because at that time, for example, the capital budget for the infrastructure, the stormwater infrastructure, 10 years combined was around $21 million, maybe a little less, over 10 years. We did the initial pieces of the ramp, but the thing we did was we did risk assessments. And when you came to the cost of an action, we have one watershed that for an annualized storm in 2070, a 100-year storm, it will experience up over an $800 million impact to it. So when you start talking about we need more money without that information, it doesn't make sense. You don't have a basis upon which for people to measure what is success and how much does it cost to get there and what is the cost benefit proposal. So now that capital program for stormwater infrastructure over 10 years has $220 million in it. Our Green Building Incentive Program, we've just come out and I can talk about it publicly. We have a new iteration of it, but rather than just tell developers we want more, we've added in an existing buildings pathway, an adaptive reuse pathway for redoing buildings that may be office buildings and repurposing them as housing, maybe affordable housing. And we're also going and proposing that there be a significant, probably 6-month curriculum and syllabus in standards such as FIOS and ILFI. Those are standards high for performance buildings, but designers, architects don't automatically default to it because their clients, neither they nor their clients are familiar with it. A lack of familiarity breeds kind of caution. And people opt for different things. And of course, our plan Langston Boulevard looks to really take sustainability and future-facing strategies, merge them across the economic, the social, and the environmental scales, and really reinterpret Plan Langston Boulevard, which is almost around 5 miles long, as a really sustainable design, urban heat island countermeasures, biophilic complete streets, transportation-oriented design. And I know that Bob talked about the strong relationship that goes back and what Arlington is today. They owe in no small part to NVRC and to Bob for that first kernel, that first spark of the fire of Prometheus that really created the original community energy plan. Because Bob has talked to you about that strong representative regional relationship. I'm just, in the interest of time, looking at our academic relationships. And these, you're probably going to get copies of all these presentations, so I won't read them. But you can see where we're very, very close to George Mason University. We are working in partnership with them on an EPA Environmental Justice G2G grant. We also supported the Virginia Climate Center's applications on 2 very, very what we consider important and essential programs for looking at health metrics and really quantifying adaptation and climate impacts. We worked with Worcester Polytechnic on adaptive reuse of buildings and are working with Virginia Tech on innovative use or application and enforcement of building codes. We have a little bit of a problem because we're constrained in Virginia from having our own REACH codes. So you have to keep with the state building code. But this allows us, through incentives and other strategies, to really go beyond and get higher performing buildings. And with that, I am going to turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Demetra. Wonderful. And picking up now is Jim Kinter from the Virginia Climate Center at George Mason University.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, well, it's a great pleasure to be here with you today, and I'm very much beholden to the speakers who came before, who said such lovely things about George Mason University and the Virginia Climate Center. We haven't paid them to say that. What I wanted to do was first just mention a couple of words about climate change in Virginia. My background is climate science. I'm one of those climate modelers you hear about from time to time. I don't know if you hear good things or bad things, but I'm one of them. And one of the things that we do in climate science is we look at data. So I'm sure you've seen this plot a million times, but I wanted to emphasize a couple of things about it. This is the global average temperature, annual values since 1850. This is the time series that broke its record last year in 2023. What's fun about this chart is, as a climate scientist, I look at this somewhat in awe. We've taken the whole planet's temperature every year since 1850. That's astounding if you think about what it takes to be able to say that with some confidence. The other fun thing about this chart is I asked a statistical question, which is there an inflection point? Is there a place where there's a trend that changes its magnitude or sign? And by magic, statistics tells us that happened in the 1970s. Now, the 1970s are interesting. So I didn't say, tell me what happened when the EPA was created or when Richard Nixon was president. I asked it, when did we start having different trend in the climate system? And you can see by the 2 lines that are fit to these data what that means. So we've changed the rate of change. Back in the 1970s, people in my field were saying, are we going to have another ice age or are we going to go into global warming? We actually couldn't tell from the data at that time which way things were going to go. There's no question anymore which way we're going to go. We're going to get warmer. We've already warmed up considerably and we're going to get warmer. And we understand why that's happening. It's happening because on a planetary scale, we are emitting carbon dioxide through the combustion of fossil fuels. The chart on the left that you can barely see is a line showing emissions, global annualized emissions of carbon dioxide. This is also kind of a fun curve if you're a historian, because you see little teeny tiny dips in this curve. There's one in the 1930s. Any guesses? Yeah, Great Depression. There's one in the 1940s. Any guesses? Yes, World War II, global disruption of the economy. There's one in 2020. That's the biggest one on there. Any guesses what that is? Yes, the global COVID-19 pandemic. But what's amazing about that is how small those dips are. We had enormous disruptions of the global economy, and still carbon dioxide emissions went apace. And of course, this past year, 2023, exceeded all previous years. What does that do to the climate system? It warms things up. We know why that happens. There's a greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is your friend. It keeps the planet from being 0 degrees Fahrenheit on average all year round. But it also has this downside, which is too much of a good thing is not a good thing. And we've seen carbon dioxide increase by more than 50% since pre-industrial values. So what is that doing in terms of temperature at a regional level? It's leading to more extreme heat. So this is just one metric of extreme heat globally, looking at the number of months in this one decade, this most recent decade, which were the hottest ever. And you can see values in excess of 20 months in a 120-month spell that were record-breaking months. Every month was another record broken. And again, we saw that this past year for the global average, and also month by month for the past 10 months. Interestingly, when we warm things up, we also change the variability. We introduce more energy into the system, and that gives us more precipitation, particularly at the extreme end of precipitation. So we see more extreme precipitation. The chart on the left is an assessment of the past several decades and how much extreme precipitation has increased. Here in Virginia, we're in the southeastern part of the United States, 37% increase in extreme events. The chart on the right is projections from those climate models that I'm partially responsible for. And there we're seeing 20, 30, 40% increases above what we've seen so far in extreme precipitation in parts of the United States. So how does all this global warming affect Virginia? And you could say, well, do global trends affect us at all? Or is it somebody else's problem? Is it the problem of this poor farmer in India who at the time this picture was taken was suffering unsurvivable heat and humidity values? To stay outdoors was to risk death unless you douse yourself with buckets of water. Well, are we going to face situations like that here? Well, that's the whole point of the Virginia Climate Center, is for us to understand precisely what the risks are, what the threats to our well-being as people, as a community, and as a commonwealth. And what we're doing in the Virginia Climate Center, our vision is a more resilient, healthy, and sustainable Virginia. And we're working to enhance resilience at the local level. And we're doing it in this way. So we're bringing Mason faculty, researchers, and students together with community leaders, both in government and in business, to not talk at you, to not, hi, we're from the university and we're here to help, but rather to say, let's co-produce solutions. Let's understand what the magnitude of the risks are, and let's understand what the uncertainty is, and co-produce solutions to measure and manage and assess and reduce our vulnerability, build our resilience to things like flash flood and extreme heat and wildfire and disease vectors. And also, all of these things have threats to public health and to infrastructure, to transportation and to commerce. And so we're looking at across the spectrum of potential impacts and trying to understand what the true risks and probabilities are. So how are things going here in Virginia? Well, guess what? Things are warming up here, and that includes extreme heat. This is just one metric of extreme heat. This is cooling degree days. And you can see from the 1950s to the present, the rapid increase, particularly after 1990. Precipitation, similarly, we've seen an increase in extreme precipitation just over the past several decades. And then as we project into the future, we see the potential, this is precipitation, this is temperature. As we project into the future, we see the potential for temperatures towards the end of this century reaching as much as 11 degrees Fahrenheit on average above the highest values that we've seen in the past century. Similarly, for extreme precipitation is increasing. This is some work done at Virginia Climate Center by one of our students, looking at the number of days of extreme precipitation in a particular part. This is just for the James River watershed near Richmond, which is leading to more flooding. So you can see the flooding incidents at Richmond on the James, leading to more road closures statewide, as well as a number of other infrastructure issues and property damage issues. And as we look at the projections into the future, this is also work done by a PhD student here at George Mason. We see that even the highest values in the NOAA 14, which is an atlas of precipitation probabilities, we see even the highest values from our historical record will be exceeded in relatively short term as we go forward into the future. So we've only been operating the Virginia Climate Center for a little over a year. And already we've been pushing out products relating to reports on resilience, on vulnerability, on clean energy. And we're working with a huge number of partners already. You've heard from two of them, NVRC and Arlington County. We're also working with a number of other jurisdictions around Virginia. And I would say importantly, looking internally here at George Mason, we've actually brought together people from the entire breadth of the university. So we have people from practically every school and college in the university working with us in the Virginia Climate Center, because the faculty and the students and the researchers here are champing at the bit to take what they have learned in the ivory tower and apply it in real-world situations. So we're really looking forward to the opportunity to work with the partners we've already established, and we're looking forward also to seeking and securing new partners that we can work with to understand their problems and help them co-produce their solutions. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Jim. And our final member of the panel who will be giving us an overview of the Institute for Sustainable Earth and various things going on at George Mason is my boss, Leah Nichols. Leah.
Thanks. Actually, I'm focusing here on the our accelerating research translation project. But as Jeremy said, I do run the Institute for Sustainable Earth. This is an element of what we're doing, and it's deeply integrated with the Virginia Climate Center. My co-PIs, Jim, Celso, and Luis, are all co-directors of the VCC. Tom Peterson is the CEO of the Center for Climate Change Strategies, a local nonprofit in the region who works locally as well as globally, helping governments develop climate and adaptation strategies. But following everything that Jim said, we applied to the NSF Accelerating Research Translation Program, because the NSF they have this new directorate called the Technology Innovations and Partnership Directorate, where the NSF is really leaning into how do we get science into the hands of the public, and how do we support and build institutional infrastructure to make that happen. And they have the ART program was looking to find individual universities to make investments in to sustainably grow the institutional capacity for research translation in both the short and the long terms. It's also very integrated with creating educational and training opportunities, especially for our students, so that they can become entrepreneurs and/or seek use-inspired and/or translational research career opportunities. We're also looking to, the program itself really wanted to dig down into support specific translational activities, as in many cases, use cases as you build out this, and test cases as you build out the institutional infrastructure to do all of this. So leveraging the great work that the VCC is doing and the pilot activities that we've undergone that Jim just described, we propose we're going to take that and ramp it up. And build the university-wide programming needed to enable the rapid, low-cost translation of the science that local governments and other community-based stakeholders need to support the development of sustainable, equitable, and climate-resilient communities. So really, this is all about building out those programs, the infrastructure, to facilitate the interactions that are needed to put research into practice in local contexts. I've already highlighted, sorry, I should mention, I've highlighted the Center for Climate Change Strategies. We're also working with MN Associates, which is an evaluation firm, and our Institute of Higher Education mentor, again, an innovation by the NSF, is our University of Kentucky and their research office, their innovation office. And so we're engaging with them to sort of learn what they've been doing in these spaces to try to adapt and translate some of those ideas into what we can do here at Mason. So our project objectives overarching are to accelerate the translation of Mason's research into practice, as I've already said, to create climate-ready communities throughout Virginia. We're working to establish and foster a culture here at Mason of translating research into implementable public programming through community engagement, technical assistance, and the co-production of research projects. This looks quite a lot different than sort of the traditional NSF thinking in the context of commercial entrepreneurship and innovation. Honestly, I thought our proposal was a bit of a long shot, but they really liked it. So we're excited to try to implement this. And then lastly, we're trying to create a climate-ready workforce of scholars, practitioners, and leaders with the skills and expertise needed to put climate research into practice. So our model really tries to mash together an extension service model. We don't have the land grant university funding, but this idea of connecting research education and outreach and long-term engagement, like the Virginia Climate Center is doing, with the lean startup method, which is a commercial strategy that the NSF I-Corps program really leans on. But they do have this mission model canvas, but really sort of getting faculty and researchers out of the ivory tower, as Jim said, and into conversations with people who might want to use this type of science, and how can we make it useful for them? Again, it's not us coming into the community and saying, hey, we're here to help. It's what is it that you need, and how is it that we can leverage our expertise and our students and our faculty to support your goals? So lastly, the programming framework that we're right in the middle of building is really building out a municipal and community engagement structure. I actually have a job opening right now. You can look for it at jobs.gmu.edu for a community engagement specialist, somebody who will be out in the communities really talking about what it is we're doing and soliciting their interest and developing the partnerships that are needed in this space. That's not something you can really do on an ad hoc basis. Otherwise, you end up with 15 different faculty members in the same people's office saying, hey, what do you want to do with me? We're trying to coordinate that and make it much more effective. The research translation activities, we're building out programming. Again, here we're supporting faculty in really understanding the science to policy ecosystem and the science to practice techniques and tools. And we're trying to help them build curricular opportunities or courses where we can bring clients, if you will, community practitioners or stakeholders into the classrooms so that the students can understand their real world challenges and design valuable product, if you will, at the end, either through various types of assessments or different types of recommendations for solutions. And then lastly, we are developing quite a lot of activity in the workforce development space, and these all tie together, lots of moving parts. First, we're going to be wrapping around those art courses or the strip courses, a postdoctoral development program, a graduate certificate program, and a climate action minor for our undergrads. And the vision here is that we want to make this accessible to all students, regardless of their program, so that they can layer on the skills of research translation or research to practice activities, regardless of whatever in the climate space, regardless of their degree. So if engineers are interested in this, we want to be able to help our engineers understand how these types of processes work. Same with our atmospheric scientists, same with our ecologists, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be wide reach. I'm going to stop there, but I just wanted to give you a sort of a flavor of where we're going with all of this, and I'll take it away.
Thank you, Leah. And once again, thank all the panelists, Bob, Demetra, Jim, and Leah. As we said at the top, now we're going to have just a few minutes for a few questions for the panelists. And hopefully, if anything that they have said has sparked a question or an insight from you, we'll then move on to questions from the audience. But to get us started, kind of at a general level, we kind of cooked up these questions in advance. And the very first one on the list is, why should municipalities engage the process of climate adaptation planning? And it seems to me that we've answered that, right? But I wanted to put that back on the table and add the question of equity. and add the question of collaboration. Because we see municipalities, we see universities. Sometimes they collaborate well, sometimes there are challenges, right? Also, when it comes to whether you're a municipality or a university, when you're collaborating with other folks, there are issues of equity, there are issues of cultural capital, there are issues of representation. So as we turn in this collaborative spirit towards preparing for that big wave, what are the challenges you see, and what are some of the ways that we can address those challenges in our design processes now to ensure for equity, to ensure for meaningful collaboration? Who would like to start?
I would say that we have to take it, for a government to exclude or ignore equity is really an abrogation of the real, really part of the responsibility of government. I think that you have to look at it because, like everything else, climate is filtered in a far more amplified way through poverty. So the impacts that a person of means may feel or may be able to harden themselves for or may be able to temporarily escape are not options that are available to disadvantaged communities. So I think it's really necessary to do that.
I would just say it, I think in the region, all of our major local governments have equity plans that include climate and economic justice, et cetera. And I think the COVID pandemic really ripped the Band-Aid off of that. And what we saw with the data and the impact of COVID in certain communities in the region. And again, a number of our local governments have programs related to climate justice, et cetera. In terms of collaboration, I mean, I've been at the commission for 10 years. I was on it for 8 as a local government official. And I don't care if you were a Republican, Democrat, or an independent on the commission. These folks have always worked together. The smallest locality could have the best idea that would help a Fairfax or an Arlington. And so I always saw it as they and me at the time having the benefit of some really great thinkers in what was going on. Involving now George Mason University and the Climate Center has been a real blessing for us. As I said earlier, we have 2 students who are going to be working on 2 important projects for us. The GMU was incredibly important for creating our first solar map in the Commonwealth. A master's student informed our green roof map that we use in the region. So we're really fortunate to have this relationship, and we look forward to growing it even more. We just finished a group went over to Stuttgart region. We're now involving the University of Stuttgart with that because there's a lot of collaboration, and the regions are very similar in terms of commitment to green infrastructure. So I'm really bullish on what people are doing to work together to make a positive difference for everybody.
Jim, please.
Yeah, just add one thing, 2 things. One is there's an element that we haven't represented here, and that is a communication element. What's frequently, and we've heard this already from a number of our municipal partners, that the best intentioned plans for establishing climate action have to be there has to be buy-in from the constituents. And in particular with the disadvantaged communities, the underserved communities, they're very busy and they don't have time necessarily to hear what sorts of things are going on for climate change. It's not their top priority necessarily. So communication about long-term thinking and planning and how all of those things can help the underserved communities of today become not so underserved communities in the future is an essential element. It's a communication element. And the other thing I'll mention is, we tout this notion that George Mason University is the most diverse public university in Virginia. And one thing, so that's kind of a brand and it's an advertising, but it's also a reality for us. We have a tremendous diversity of students in our classrooms and a tremendous diversity of students who are interested in working on research projects with the faculty and with other researchers. And they bring a perspective that isn't necessarily first and foremost among the people who are leading the research. So we're listening to our students. And I think that's a critically important part of how we can actually serve the underserved.
Thank you, Jim. Leah, thoughts?
The only thing I'll add to that, because I was going to talk about the diversity of our student population, is we're starting to also explore potential pathway or potential collaborations with local community colleges, because as we're finding, we're out in the community, as individuals are learning about and starting to work on these types of challenges, the more we can create pathways to upskill, to develop capacity to do this type of work. We can come from the community colleges up to Mason and then back into the community, right? Because we want to be empowering communities to do this work, not have people flying in from the outside and sort of taking over a community, if you will.
If I could just add really quickly, the EPA grant that we have that we're partnering with the Virginia Climate Center on has a number of decision support tools that we're delivering. And one of those actually is a public engagement plan, which Arlington has a very, very fulsome public engagement structure to it, but not one that is really specifically tailored for this, dynamic and the cadence of the disadvantaged communities. So that is going to be one of the deliverables.
Great. Thank you for that, panelists. Going from kind of the general and generic, speaking about climate and speaking about preparations and collaboration, Bob, you mentioned, and of course you're steeped in regional dynamics. You also mentioned the region in Germany, Stuttgart, and the great collaboration there. I'd like to hear from each of you about what you find to be unique about Northern Virginia when it comes to preparations for climate change, collaboration, adaptation, community buy-in, et cetera, and what maybe unique challenges or opportunities you see to be a region that can bring other regions along, be they nationally or globally, that could begin to learn from what we're doing here. Bob, take it away.
How much time do we have on this one, really? I mean, I don't think I'll go to the George Mason University's climate communications tool. People in Northern Virginia actually believe that climate change is happening, and it's having it has a negative impact. So
That's a start.
It's not like you have to convince a lot of folks in our communities that climate change is happening and there's an impact. And to be honest, it's true across the entire Commonwealth. I mean, it may not be as high as it is up here. I'm one of these folks. I always ask my team is, how are we getting stuff done? We talk about a lot of this work, but how are we getting stuff done? Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of great programs in Virginia and a lot of great programs run by our local governments. But it's actually trying to convince people that, one, we are from the government and really here to help you. And number two, a lot of them are geared towards people who are income challenged or are at a certain age level, and they're really free. We're not this group of shysters out to break something in your house and present you with a $20,000 bill. And Northern Virginia is a majority-minority region. It is diverse. Most of our communities, the majority of school children speak different languages at home, over 100 different languages at home. And so it's a matter of working to convince people. The solar array may not be not something you can do, but the free energy efficiency program can make a difference in your life. And so that, to me, and and Demetra and I and our colleagues in sustainability will tell you that's the biggest challenge. Is there are great programs, but getting them down into people's homes and making a positive difference, to me, is a big challenge. And we just got to continue to work at it, because with all of the new money in the Inflation Reduction Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, We've applied for a carbon pollution reduction grant. There's a lot more of this money coming, and if we win one or two of these things, we have to spend it within a 5 or 6 year period of time. So that's going to be the biggest challenge.
Thanks, Bob. Demetra?
I think one of the greatest benefits that I've seen coming from a couple of different other states is that Virginia, I will say, the law, the state law of the Commonwealth is so standing alone, really constraining, prescriptive, and limiting in what it allows local jurisdictions to do on their own, which is virtually nothing. So what you had in Northern Virginia was this kind of unique cultivation of innovation to get around those constraints. So I think that's probably one of the greatest assets of Northern Virginia.
Is that the Dillon rule, two-step, as it were? Thanks. Jim or Leah, any thoughts on what's unique about this region?
Well, I like Bob's point about Northern Virginia is not a place where you have to, knock people down and say, do you know climate is changing? Right. It's also true that across Virginia, people understand that climate change is happening, but there's a much different appreciation for what the impact is going to be, and in particular, what solutions are available. So when we started working with communities outside of Northern Virginia, what we found is that there's much more resistance to thinking about both resilience and mitigation. So thinking about solarizing the energy system, or thinking about protecting from heat or from flooding. Those are not things that are high priority items in, for example, Southside Virginia, or if we go out to the west and look in the Blue Ridge and Shenandoah areas. So there, what we're doing is we're learning from the example in Northern Virginia. We're learning how Northern Virginia has embraced the issue and as Demetra pointed out, and has embraced innovation as a way of dealing with problems that are incipient now but could become enormous later. And I think that's really the advantage that we have sitting here in Northern Virginia, is we can benefit from the experience that's already here, and also we can benefit from the fact that this region has this close relationship with communities in Germany, because the Germans, believe it or not, are way ahead in terms of both accepting this situation at the population level, not at the leadership level, but the population is very much behind climate change adaptation and mitigation activities. So we can learn from them as well, and we're doing that through our relationship that we've established with NVRC.
Leah?
The only thing I think I'll add to that is, when you're working in Northern Virginia, you're already 5 steps or 10 steps down the board, right? There's a lot of data, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of innovation, and we're really chewing on how to effect solutions. Mm-hmm. We're definitely not seeing the same level across the state. We have one of the partners on the ART is currently doing a survey of hazard, risk, and climate assessments at all of the jurisdictions across the state. And the vast majority of them, well, most of them have a climate or a risk and hazard assessment. Very few of them take into account climate. So in many cases, when we're working outside of the Northern Virginia region, we're starting more at square one.
Right.
And that's a different conversation. That's a different type of innovation, and that's a different type of support.
Sure. Maybe staying with this theme a little bit, and then we'll hopefully be able to hear some questions from the audience. Your responses, panelists, remind me of the old adage about the states being the sort of laboratories for democracy, where a state will, try something, and then maybe if it works, another state will adopt it. I wonder if there's an analogy for climate adaptation at the local level or at the state level with the VCC that you're particularly encouraged by. And if so, maybe we can think about particular climate challenges that we're seeing right here and right now in Northern Virginia or throughout the Commonwealth, and where we're kind of seeing the solutions and the innovations that you all are kind of working on. I know we've talked about collaborations and pipelines, community college, et cetera, but are there specific things that, we're seeing now, and you're trying to, or your colleagues and your work are trying to really activate solutions towards? Jim.
Sure. Well, so here in Northern Virginia, I mean, I didn't mention it. There's a third aspect of climate change. There's heat, there's precipitation, but there's also sea level rise, which is an inevitable fact of the climate warming up. The ocean expands as it warms and the ice melts. When the ice melts on land, it runs off into the ocean level rises. So, well, okay, Virginia has some exposure to the ocean, but you might say most of the Commonwealth, not a big deal. Try to tell that to someone in Alexandria, where the water is coming up over the seawall on a monthly basis now. Right. And there is a multi-million-dollar project to completely reimagine the Old Town waterfront area in Alexandria. Why? Because climate change is real for them, and they have had to figure out what to do about it. They haven't reached the level of Miami, which they can't flush the toilets now unless they have pumps to pump things back out into the ocean. Right. But it's coming. And so those are the sorts of things where, when the reality confronts you, you can do stuff. We're seeing that in other parts of the Commonwealth. There, outside of Northern Virginia and the Norfolk, Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach area, the state is largely rural, and Richmond also. But most of the rest of the state is rural. If you look at the population density, it's mostly very low in this Commonwealth. And that has a number of implications. It means the counties have a very small tax base. No industry, no taxes. It also means that and the rural areas in the state are primarily traditional family farms, not corporate entities that are, agribusinesses. And so we're looking not only at climate change threatening heat and precipitation and on the coast sea level rise and coastal erosion, but in the interior, we're seeing cultures being threatened. Right. The culture of agriculture, the whole family traditional structure that's built around agriculture and other rural enterprise is being threatened. Yeah. And is being threatened directly by climate change. So this is where we can help them understand what those threats are, not only to infrastructure or property, but also to livelihood and culture. And that's, I think, where we're going to have some resonance with people outside of the urbanized northern core.
I want to sort of build on that and highlight some of the work that the Virginia Climate Center has done, focusing around heavy precipitation events, because a lot of the flood planning and the flood management is looking at 100-year floodplain efforts, and what we found is the water in the flash flooding contexts doesn't necessarily adhere to those 100-year floodplain aspects. In fact, most of the road closures where you're seeing there's swiftwater rescues happening in an urban context, I think it was like 60% of them are happening outside of those floodplain aspects. So that that's a challenge that is sort of off people's radars, but very, very much lived in the lived experience. So it's an example of some of the work we've been doing.
I was going to say that, in follow-up on what Jim said, climate change is a national security issue. Norfolk is the home to the world's largest naval facility.
Exactly.
And if you can't get the men and women of the armed services to their job, it's a problem. I said earlier, we have a grant from the Department of Defense looking at military installation resilience review and have identified over $300 million worth of projects that affect both sides of the fence line. So we're working on 2 at Marine Corps Base Quantico. 1 is for the main gate. And when we have one of these wild weather events that drops a couple of inches of rain within an hour or so, the main gate to Marine Corps Base Quantico is inaccessible.
Wow.
And that causes problems on Route 95. It causes problems in the community of Triangle, et cetera. So we've identified some engineering solutions to this problem, working with AECOM. And I guess only in the federal government would they allow the runway where the president's helicopters fly in to be eroded by the Potomac River. I mean, all the communication cables, hey, look at that, oh, it's all the communication cables that running along the shoreline. And so we're working with the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences to come up with a design to fix that.
Yep.
So there's real implications for our national defense and for others to get these things fixed.
Thank you for that, Bob. Demetra, last word?
I would say, and it's a new development within the past year that's coming up, is that when I first got here, everyone said, well, when you go down to Richmond, keep quiet, because you came here from California, you're originally from New York, and now you live in Northern Virginia, and everyone will ignore you down there. So
A trifecta.
yeah. So, but one of the reasons that local governments in the state of California, as large as that state is, were able to succeed is because they had something called the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition. And regardless of whether you were from a red area or a blue area or a rich and affluent community or a non-affluent community, that organization was based on fundamental principles of rising waters lift all ships. So the more affluent communities carried the lower ones because we were doing good for everybody. And you're starting to see less compartmentalization in the local governments. And I have to say, there are a couple of people on the AIR team in Arlington that are really pushing this work, is really gathering everybody, because you lose power that way. You lose influence and ability to really affect change. If I walked into the California Public Utilities Commission and said, hi, I'm the Director of Sustainability for the County of Santa Clara, we've got almost 2 million people, blah, blah, blah. In California, that's no big deal. But I went into the California Public Utilities Commission and said, I'm on the board of the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition. Collectively, we represent 68% of the state's ratepayers and citizens. That got everybody's attention.
Sure.
So you really need that cohesion, that camaraderie, that collaboration, and just that force of will where all the governments come together. And that's starting to happen now.
Starting to happen here in Virginia.
Yeah.
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 It's exciting. Well, once again, I want to thank the panelists, but we're not done yet. Now we'll open it up for any questions that may occur to you or anything you want to bring up to any one of our panelists. We have a microphone right here and a microphone over there. Please just introduce yourselves and then jump into it.
Yes, I'm Dale Rothman. I'm a faculty member in the Computational and Data Sciences program. So the first thing I realized, I need to go downstairs more because the Virginia Climate Center, I have spoken with Leah, but it's been a while. This morning I happened to be participating in what was the 25th anniversary of a group called the Integrated Assessment Society. It's primarily in Europe. And one of the things that came out of that was very interesting was someone commenting on translational science and moving beyond making our research available to making our research accessible. And it really sort of struck people participating in this. And so it's what Leah was talking about in terms of the NSF grant, and particularly the STRP. So is it possible for you to tell a little bit more about what that focus is going to be? Because I know as a researcher, oftentimes we don't have time at the end, or we don't have money in our grants to undertake that kind of work.
Sure.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you for the question. I will sort of push back on it's not about making it accessible either. It's about making it useful, right? The most accessible data, if it's not meeting specific needs, nobody's going to use. And there's dozens of decision support tools that are like that out there. So data or interpretations of data. And so the STRPs, which stands for in the NSF grant language, was Seed Translational Research Project. So that's where we're going to really be working with individual faculty members who are interested, providing some financial support and providing a lot of mentorship support to walk you through, this is how I think my science is going to make a difference in the world. and help you sort of get you out of the science, or out of the ivory tower, if you will, or out of the university, and talking to people where it's like, oh yes, I think I will help that person or that person or that person, and it's effectively a customer discovery process. So I think my science is gonna be useful here. You talk to them, most of the time your first guess is not right. Right. And so you start gathering data and you really start understanding that ecosystem in which the science that you're producing could have an impact or could land. And then you start transforming the way that you're thinking about what is the innovation, what is the data, what needs to be produced, how does it need to be produced, and what are the relationships that need to be built in order to make that type of research to practice translation possible. So hopefully we're going to be doing it in such a way that faculty have the time. We'll be providing graduate students and so forth to really help make this type of program happen. And yeah, so I'd love to talk to you more.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's
Next question.
Claudia Nierenberg. I'm from NOAA. Actually, that inspired another question. Whether your experience, I think you all touched on this, and it was a great panel, by the way. The extent to which your experience out with communities, with governments, with the water utility is changing your curriculum here. You touched on that, whether it involves a law school, I'm not sure if there's a business school, and how that's happening. But my original question was, and maybe they're related, about stakeholder fatigue, if you're running into this, and about, we always hear, where I come from, about too many toolkits, too many tools, and the need for more sort of sustained interaction.
I'll jump on that one as well. Because the first part to your question, I do hope that the STRIP program that we're developing, actually, and the more that we engage with our communities, absolutely should be transforming the way that both we're doing our research and our educational activities. And that is one of the primary benefits of this type of activity in my head, is how do we transform our institutions of higher education so that they're producing students and they're producing science that are meeting needs of our communities. Secondary to what was the other question? Stakeholder fatigue, yes. That is absolutely true, and you guys can talk about that, of course. But one of the ways that we're trying to minimize that is both through the Institute of Sustainable Earth and the Virginia Climate Center is creating that effectively front door so that we are trying to mitigate that relationship between the several hundred faculty that we have in our communities. And so, we have a person interacting with the community saying, or the local governments, and understanding, oh, there's opportunities here and here or here to connect with these three faculty members. It's not those three faculty members showing up in an office saying, I want to work with you. And then there's also that front door sort of aspect of it is to help really sort of facilitate the where is the value add in the relationship, so that we're trying not to recreate that wheel over and over and over again, but we're trying to reduce the type of activation energy or activation cost. Then lastly, on your tools, because there's dozens, actually thousands of tools out there that have been funded and built that are not being used. We're trying not to do that again. Like, we're not trying to rebuild tools. We're not trying to make new tools. Trying to use what exists, and part of the model of the Virginia Climate Center is to establish that long-term relationship, so that we can activate tools that exist. We pair, we bring data science expertise tools to a community that may not, the tool obviously wasn't designed in such a way that it was useful for them. So how can we work together to use what we have to create the most value and use for you? Does that make sense?
Jim?
Yeah, Claudia, thank you for the question. Actually, seeing you reminded me that a very important slide got deleted from my deck, which was the thank you slide, in interest of time. And we owe NOAA a great debt of thanks, because NOAA actually provided the pilot funding for the Virginia Climate Center. But to the point about stakeholder fatigue, one of the things that I think is important about, so this is huge proliferation of tools, and there's huge proliferation of data sets that are sitting under the tools. And my impulse as a climate scientist and maybe as a data specialist, our impulse is, let's create a new tool, or let's find a cool and innovative way to use the data or create some new data with a model or what have you. And nobody wants that anymore. I won't say nobody, but it's very unusual to find somebody who's saying, I've tried every tool that's out there and I just don't know none of them works for me. So what they really want is curation. They want somebody to say, here's the range of things that are information products that we can help you transform into knowledge products, things that are going to actually be useful for you. So I think that's one of the strengths that we have is we know all of the tools. We know all of, I don't say all, but we have a very good understanding of what the universe of possibilities is on the data side and on the tools side. But what we're learning is what stakeholders need. So this is the idea of meeting people where they are and understanding what their problems are so that we can curate what's available and make best available and help them understand how to use them in their own context. Your first question was about curriculum. So one of the things that Leah mentioned about the art project, which I love the name, it's our art project. One of the things is the creation of a couple of new degree programs, one an undergraduate minor for climate action and the other a graduate badge program, which is a mini credential. We found that here at George Mason, I'm sure this is true at every university, there are courses that are either climate change courses or have a climate change module, or they've got, one of the 6 themes of the course is climate change all over the university. They're in the law school, they're in the business school, they're in the economics department, they are in humanities, the art department has climate change, obviously in College of Science, obviously in the engineering college, School of Public Health. There are courses everywhere where people have either put climate change in the title, they've flipped their syllabus so that it's got a climate change sense. So what we're doing is, that's just a bewildering set of possibilities for the students. So what we're going to do with these graduate and undergraduate opportunities is pull all that together so that students who are doing an undergraduate major in, for example, public medicine, will be able to see that for just a little bit more effort, taking courses that are a little bit outside their comfort zone, as well as plenty of courses that are within their program, they can also get the climate action minor. And then they qualify as students who have both the public health expertise, but also know how to apply it to climate change and climate change impacts. And same thing at the graduate level. People who might be going into either into academia or into the government to be producing technical work will be able to understand how climate change could impact the way they do their work or how their work could address climate change issues. So we do see it changing the curriculum at that level, and it's primarily a coordination activity so that students will have a better feeling for what they can do, because the other thing is that students are dying to do stuff that is helpful. They want to be able to go out into the world and make a difference. And one of the things that we're going to give them the tools and the capabilities to do that.
Bob.
I love all these tools and dashboards, and I'll give you 2 that we work with George Mason. Go to novasolarmap.com, and using the supercomputers at George Mason University, we analyzed over 500,000 buildings in Northern Virginia for their solar potential. And we have a dedicated website for that, and when we run our solar campaigns, the hits go through the roof, then the solar campaign is over, and they go back down, but it's a great educational tool. And we just signed an agreement with a person from George Mason who's going to update it because it's 8 years old, and there are a lot more houses in Loudoun and Prince William County that haven't been analyzed. The second one was based on a master's thesis of a student from George Mason, greenroofmap.com, where we analyzed the urban core of Northern Virginia for the green roof potential for commercial buildings with certain percentage degree of the roof. And so you'll be able to get the amount of rainwater that it absorbs, the environmental benefit, et cetera. And it's just a great way to show folks how a green roof can benefit them if it's capable. But the solar one is super because it gives you how big of an array can fit, what the electricity savings can be and the greenhouse gas emissions averted based upon that analysis. And I also want to say thank you to NOAA. We just finished a grant with NOAA on the 4 Mile Run watershed, and that project's just done now, and the paper was published. But the more the better. And I love the dashboards. All that stuff to me is really a helpful educational tool in showing people in simple way positive impact of things that they can do.
Thank you, Claudia, for your question. We have time for one more question from you, sir, please.
Nick Katziotis, I'm a contractor that was involved early on with energy savings performance contracting with DOE. It didn't really take off like we thought, but my bigger question is a national security risk in your models with Chinese products, rare earths, 80% Chinese. That's all in our wind turbines, our batteries. Silica is in 80% of our PV panels. Are we connecting that risk to any of these models that you're running to see what potential risk that would affect with this development of more renewables, which we need to do? That's my question. Because I don't hear anybody talking about it. And the young kids don't seem to understand these batteries are all coming from China.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm going to say something now that will make it very clear that I am not an engineer. We do have lithium batteries, and that has been the go-to standard, and we're looking for greater efficiency and larger batteries and blah, 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 blah. But when you go to anything that is electrified, moving away from gas, for example, particularly in transportation, the energy use intensity of electric batteries on vehicles is supercharged. I can't even explain compared to electrification in buildings. It makes the vehicle far heavier. It makes the energy load far greater. And quite frankly, the entire country is dealing with an energy grid that's anywhere from 50 to 80 years old. And it's kind of an analog grid in a digital world. So there's a lot of money, a lot of just vast intelligence that's being invested in. There's this kind of liquid flow battery that they're talking about that is smaller, it's more condensed, it gives out greater power, it has higher energy efficiency and output. So you've got those types of innovations in technology that are going to diversify. And I think that one of the reasons there's such great investment in small nuclear, modular nuclear, for example, with Bill Gates's company, why you see large investment now by the federal government clearly in the Infrastructure Act in generating funding for hydrogen hubs, is that they're looking to mitigating and diversifying your sources of energy, and your technologies are the best way to mitigate risk, really.
Well, the EPRI model a long time ago had fuel cells in neighborhoods run by natural gas. And people don't know this, 2 units of electricity at the power station, you get 1 unit at the point of consumption. So the T&D and all the loss in the turbine or whatever you're using, solar panels 18% efficient. It just doesn't seem to register in the big picture. And I'm wondering, because I didn't know you were running all these models, and that's why I came. Are you modeling any of this inside with these HPCs?
Yeah,
That's
so-
the only way you can do it.
Yeah, so I'm not. So when I talk about a model, I'm talking about a model of the Earth system. So atmosphere, ocean, land, surface. But having said that, that kind of work is going on at George Mason as well as more broadly. It's kind of falls into this whole category of integrated assessment, where you build a model that represents both natural systems and how they respond to stimuli, and economic systems and how they respond to stimuli. And you can put in like political inputs, for example, your idea of buying domestic versus getting supplies from China. So, and there are people at GMU who are working on that, and they view it through an optimization lens. So the idea is if you want to optimize a workflow or you want to optimize some kind of production line, and you want to get largest output for smallest input, and then you constrain the problem. So the constraints would be buy domestic, or the constraints would be limiting the load on the roads so that you're not adding weight. Those are all things that can be done in an optimization framework. What we're trying to do in the Virginia Climate Center is bring people who are doing that kind of work together with the people who are doing what I do, like Earth system modeling, or people who do the communications piece. So thinking about how to get, like you say, people don't know. So how do we let people know that? And what information is going to be valuable to people, either in government or in the constituencies of government? So we are working on that. I'd say it's really early days for us. The integrated assessment world has been around for quite a while, and they largely think globally. They think about global markets and global Earth system models, but that kind of local thinking is starting to creep in.
All right. Well, thank you all for your attention and your attendance. Let's give our panelists one more round of applause, please. Thank you, panelists, for exploring collaborations in climate adaptation in Northern Virginia. And I'm sure they'll be available if you want to approach and exchange information afterwards. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.